Hey everyone, Joy Brooks with Email and Coffee and Lucy. Today I have brought back a guest of mine that I spoke with sometime last year, perhaps the year before, Derek Latal. We share our passion in ancient and classical history, just everything about it. I mean, we were talking before we started to record. And if I hadn't hit the record button, we'd still be talking. So here we are together. We're going to do a little bit something maybe a little different. I will share my screen and we're going to talk about pictures. But before we start doing that, Derek, what have you been doing? What's up? What's new? What's cool? Where are you going next time?
I believe it's been changing every couple of months when I think, this would be a great place to visit and do. But no, just been, thanks for having me back on. I think it's been about a year and a couple of months since I was last on. So it's been pretty quiet, which is all I can ask for. I've been just chugging along with writing, show production, balancing work life. But since our last discussion, I visited Greece back in April of March of 2024. Went to the northern part of the country, so I got to travel myself there around Thessaloniki, Meteora, and all up and down of ancient Macedonia. That was very cool. And now I'm in the midst of planning probably my most ambitious trip so far, about almost 2 weeks in Jordan. So in a few months, I'll be going to Jordan to visit Petra, Amman, Jerash, Wadi Rum, both Greek, Roman, and Nabatean sites, along with a couple of other cool spots like Castle Karak, which is a Crusader-era castle, along with Ajlun, which is built by Salahuddin himself. So that's very cool. And just been trying to get over the winter blues as we're getting through this and look forward to getting in the nice, lovely, sunny weather of the Mediterranean once again.
If people aren't familiar with Petra, that was some of the site that was used in Indiana Jones.
The Last Crusade. Last Crusade.
You come out of that really wild crevice where the rocks are all around you and it's only a few people wide. You walk through it and then suddenly, bam, you're in this incredible place between the rocks where they built homes in the rocks. Just homes and burial grounds. It was, the Nabateans were traders extraordinaire.
Petra for a lot of people is what for some is the pyramids of Giza, or the Colosseum in Rome. It is one of those. It's an incredible region of the world where there are so many parts of it that were so well preserved, and people may think Petra is probably the closest image that people would ever associate with the landscape. As you mentioned, Indiana Jones has used them. Parts of the region area outside of that had been filmed for Prometheus, for The Martian, I believe, starring Matt Damon, and Interstellar, I think, as well. But I think it's that part, the Levant, the ancient Near East, that whole strip of land, basically running from the Sinai Peninsula all the way up to the edges of Turkey and Syria. That whole stretch is so dense in terms of settlements and archaeological sites. And unfortunately, at the moment, Jordan is probably the most safe region to travel in that part. And as much as I would love to say more from my period to visit the parts of Syria where the Seleucids were most predominant, visit Apamea or Palmyra or Dura Europos. Jordan is a little bit more of a friendlier introduction to the region, but I'm looking forward to it. It's going to be exhausting, but I think it's going to be well worth it.
Yeah, I was talking to you before about Ugarit, which is in Syria, which it's been like stop and go with archaeology because it's not a good place where I would yet another place I'd love to go.
Mm-hmm.
So for this talk, we're going to do a little travelogue down the coast of Turkey, Anatolia, the west coast, of Turkey. And we'll start at Constantinople, which is Istanbul or Byzantium. All those three places. There's a song about that. It's had all these wonderful names.
Oh yeah, I mean, wasn't it by the gentleman who did the song, the band that did Rasputin, Russia's Greatest Love Machine?
Probably.
I think so. I'm not too sure, but yeah, I mean, it depends. Wherever part of the world I go, the name changes, and unfortunately, you got to make sure you know what name to use at what time. I try to use Istanbul when in Istanbul, in Constantinople, I use Constantinople among my Greek friends and extended friends. But Istanbul was a very interesting experience. This is my first foray into what you would call the predominantly Islamic world of the modern era. It was a very interesting introduction. I mean, obviously, one of my other passions beyond the Hellenistic world and ancient Rome, I find late antiquity and what you would call Byzantium to be super interesting. So anything from Constantine onwards, or even Diocletian, down to the Middle Ages to 1453. Istanbul is very big, very crowded, and the fact that it does straddle the borders of Europe and Asia is incredibly unique by itself. And the weird sensation of realizing I had stepped onto Asian soil, if we want to call it that, based on that, was pretty bizarre. Like, it just happened, and I was like, oh, I guess we're in Asia. We're in Asia now, as opposed to being strictly in Europe. But I spent a couple of days here in September of 2023, and this was kind of like my not the main area of focus, but it was a big part of it, and I was able to tour it over a couple of days. And that would be crossing the Bosphorus, seeing everything that it has to offer, ranging from Galata to Hagia Sophia, and also the Ottoman architecture, like the Blue Mosque and the Mosque of Suleiman. You could see every corner you pass by, like Rome, it's something ancient or something earlier.
It's if you're in the States and you travel, you can go back. You can go back 250 years for sure, and then you can go even further back, right? If you do the Southwest, or some places in Ohio where they suspect that it's older than we think it is.
Mm-hmm.
But when you're in Europe and you hit some of these places that have, 5,000 years, you know it when you get there, because there's a look, there's a feel, there's an atmosphere, the people, everything around you. I mean, the colors. Sometimes the colors are so lively, like all of those ceramic colors. That when you go into a town like New York City, it's like it's gray and brown and more gray and maybe black. But you go into some of these ancient cities, and there's lots of color.
Like, that's
with the grays and the browns of the modern city.
Mm-hmm. I mean, comparing it, depending on where you go, like for me, Chicago is my closest metropolitan area. And among American cities, I can say we are actually quite blessed in terms of our architecture, and there's a pretty rich diversity of skyline. But in terms of visiting anything of a historical sense, the closest we can get to is Cahokia, which is about 6 hours south of where I'm based out of, and that's a large mound of the local Native American communities that had lived there hundreds of years earlier. But the sense of the bizarre factor of going into Rome and for the first time and kind of getting almost like a culture shock of everywhere you turn, you could just feel the antiquity of everything you're living in. You could see just the layers of, you're going from modern period, early modern, medieval, late antiquity, like pre-ancient and or classical antiquity, and depending on in Turkey is a great example of this. You can sometimes see way older than classical antiquity, going back to the Bronze Age, and if you're in Göbekli Tepe, way earlier than this in 8,000, 9,000 BC, if I understand correctly.
Yes.
So, I mean, you can't. I mean, there's the whole joke of construction crews and construction being slow in places like Greece and Italy, where anytime you go to dig a new sump pump up, you end up pulling up a whole artifact that you have to quarantine off and get
Exactly.
insights on. It's wild. It's pretty
They
pretty
become
impressive.
the first archaeologists. They're like the when they build cities or roads or anything like that, if they find anything, everything stops.
Oh yeah.
Everything stops.
And then you get in the conspiracies of, how many things have they found, but they decided just to bulldoze over because they got quotas. They got to make their business before the summer goes. But no, I mean, besides that, like that sense of like the change in the aesthetics of and the philosophies of how they design cities, because in the United States, a lot of it is very, I guess Chicago was a great one example, how it was designed in such a way where they were very planned out, whereas a lot of these cities grow centrally outwards, like a radius. Chicago grows straight lines, Hippodamian grid, if you want to call it that. Very structured.
Very Roman.
Very Roman, very Greco-Roman,
city.
Ironically, but then everywhere else is just organically centered and then just grew out, and then they got to deal with the after effects of that.
Exactly. So we're going to go through some pictures, and it's going to be alphabetical order, which means we may be jumping around a little bit. But before we go, I just wanted to blow up the map a little bit. We're going to give everybody an idea that we're going to jump around a bit. But Byzantium starts here. Here's Constantinople, Istanbul, Byzantium. And then we're going to blow up the map a little bit because I can do that. But by the time I do that, I'll be old. So hold on So we're going to blow the map up a little bit. There you go. I hope that worked.
Yep.
Yes, it did.
Yep.
So now from there, we're going to, there's Pergamon, there's Smyrna, there's Sardis, there's, I don't even know which arrow I'm using. There's Ephesus, there's Priene, and I think those are the towns. This is Istanbul, Ephesus.
I visited a lot of places. I think Sardis was among them, as was Pergamon, and
right.
Yeah. I mean, if you in that part of the region of Western Turkey, I mean, you could throw a stone and hit an ancient city. It was so densely populated that you could spend weeks along the coastline just hitting every ruin, and you would still have not enough time. It's absolutely astonishing. I've never experienced anything like that before.
But to give the audience even more of an understanding is that this was the Hellenistic Empire. So here we have the Attalids, the Attilids, which was Pergamon, the whole area of Pergamon. We've got the Seleucids, which is Syria, going down to the Levant. And at some point it would hit the Ptolemy, which is why we see it saying Ptolemy's Cyprus, because the Egyptians were conquered by, let's put it this way, the Macedonian Empire at the death of Alexander broke apart at the seams because Alexander basically said on his deathbed, give it to the strongest man. And so they fought it out. If he actually did say that. So, we've got, at the time it was Lysimachus.
So generally speaking, with a lot of the Asia Minor, at this point, this is a little bit later in the Hellenistic world. However,
yes.
At the time of Alexander's demise, Asia Minor was the western coast of Asia Minor was heavily populated by Greeks who had colonized the region. And in fact, that's where a lot of what we know as the Milesian Revolution took place, where the earliest developments of philosophy, such as in Magnesia and in Thales, the philosopher Thales, and Anaximander of Miletus. That whole stretch was extremely populated, and it was very culturally productive, if you want to put it that way. Then when Alexander rolled in, that again, it was reinforced. It was a really wealthy and productive area. It was heavily contested between the Seleucid Empire. The Attalids were an emerging Hellenistic state that kind of carved its way out, and with the help of Rome, acquired most of Asia Minor at some point. And there were many other smaller tyrants, city-states, kingdoms ruled by former Persian dynasties, Celts, as we could see in the Galatians. That's where they settled, and of the Bible's Galatians.
People don't know that. This is the Celts, the Galatians. The Celts, as in England, the Celts, what we consider, weren't the Celts in England? No, not necessarily.
They were, unfortunately, they were very mobile people, and after the death of Alexander and all the infighting, they saw a pretty ripe target when everybody was too busy struggling for little bits of land here and there. But my main focus...
Also, Galatians as in Gaul as in France, the same peoples.
And there's a lot of connections with their culture of the Galatians as a people versus the traditional Celts you think of Caesar's Gallic Wars, or the ones who invaded Rome and Brennus and all that good stuff. But
history can be pretty fluid.
Yeah.
It's like, go figure who was there first. Go figure.
Yeah, there's always somebody else, unfortunately.
There's always somebody else. Somebody else.
And what makes it complicated is, from my region that we were focusing on primarily, it is known as Mysia, a little bit further down. There are many cities along that stretch that are just, they've produced amazing ruins and archaeological sites. They're relevant for classical historians, also biblical historians, as we'll get into. Many of the cities I visited were extremely important for the development of Christianity and other aspects of culture and civilization. So there's plenty to talk about, I'm sure, as we'll get to at some point.
Yeah, it just rich, to say the least. So the first picture we're going to take a look at, and I want to make sure that I know what I'm talking about. It's is it Bellevue Mausoleum? Is that how you pronounce it?
Possibly. I'm no Turkish expert, so Bellevue or Bellevue would be perfectly fine by me.
Okay, so let me pull the picture up because I can do this. And I'm saying that because I'm hoping I can do this. Okay, so first picture. Here we go. There you go.
Perfect. So this is actually an interesting little find. So just about 20 minutes north of Ephesus is this pretty unassuming offshoot of the highway in Turkey, where you approach this large hill that kind of is surrounded by pine trees and scrub and rocks. Well, as you get closer to it, this is actually a large tomb that is almost in ruins at this point. But, and what I mean by large, it is absolutely massive. It is hard to explain how large this site is. This is a early Hellenistic monument, probably sometime around the early 3rd century BC, so between 300 to 275 is where people predict it. We know very little about who occupied the tomb. Based on its size, we have a pretty strong indication that it was a tomb for one of the Hellenistic dynasty's kings. Whether that is Antigonus the One-Eyed, Monophthalmos, who was who had died at Ipsus in 301 and was trying to conquer the entirety of the Alexandrian Empire, or was it a Seleucid king, possibly Antiochus II Theos, who died in Sardis, only a couple of miles away? We just don't know. It's been completely depopulated, but this is about as rugged as exploration can get, because you have to crawl through a hole in a chain barbed wire fence. And that's not me sneaking in. That is actually how you get in. That's the entranceway. So,
and a lot of these rocks that we see that are shaped at the bottom were probably at the top.
They were pieces of the decoration of the top. And actually what's interesting is that this is what approximates as a model, probably based on the mausoleum of Halicarnassus, the famous one of King Mausolus, that is in Halicarnassus, which is not that far away either. This would have given us a good approximation of what it maybe looked like, the size, the dimensions, and all over the site you can find the remains of the carved stonework and snakes too, so you got to be careful when you're sticking your hand in a place where you're worried about getting bit by an adder or something along those lines. But actually, my next photo kind of gives you an idea of where the entrance might have been. So this is the interior of the site. You climb in through these rocks. You enter through the steps. You have to scramble all to get inside. And this is probably where the interior of the tomb was, and where the body of the king who was there, or the occupant, or whoever it may have been, is, as you can tell, it's been completely plundered and emptied, but it doesn't lose its sense of size and scale, and the fact that it was we had the whole site to ourselves. So how alone we were. It was very bizarre. It felt very much like the closest I could get to being Indiana Jones, of scrambling over an ancient tomb that has been long forgotten in the background with no tourists. And it is something, if you are in the area, I would definitely suggest checking out on the way to Ephesus.
How big are those stones on the bottom?
So for size perspective, they're probably about a good 5 foot high.
Oh my!
Yeah, they're pretty big. I wish I'd include the photo of this. I do have me sitting on a step, but I look terrible in the photo because I was sunburned. The size comparison is gargantuan in any sense of the word, and that's kind of the interesting thing, is like the fact that you can visit a tomb of an ancient Hellenistic king, especially when you're considering where is Cleopatra buried, where is Alexander buried, and just think of how much the scale has gone up and what we're missing from that time period. Because comparing this to my recent visit to the tomb of King Philip II of Macedon, kind of a predecessor to all of these guys, or maybe they've even worked with him, depending if it's Antigonus. It's interesting to see that a lot of these customs of interring the dead in these large raised mounds was consistent with the practice of the Macedonian kings as it was back in Alexander's country or homeland. So it was very interesting to compare the two, and also similar with the tombs of Mycenae as well.
Mm-hmm. Right. So let's see now the next picture, and I want to make sure that I get this right. The next picture is, we're going to start in with some Ephesus pictures.
We certainly can.
So let's go to Ephesus. So this is pretty cool.
Ephesus is a pretty interesting site. It's probably the most well-recognizable of all the ancient sites in this region of Turkey. Primarily known for the Library of Celsus, which we will show you in just a moment, I bet. But this is from the perspective of the theater connecting to the main colonnade of the road that used to lead to the sea. Well, after thousands of years of silting, the sea is no longer connected to Ephesus. Being a former trade port, this was an immensely wealthy and rich city that was, at various points of the Roman Empire, was up there competing with the likes of Antioch or Antioch, Alexandria. Probably, if you're talking top 10 cities, it was probably somewhere around number 5 or 6. It was that relevant to trade, and allegedly is where not allegedly, but it is a high place where Christianity had very strong roots. Paul's letters to the Ephesians, as part of protesting or defending Christianity, and according to legend, that's where Mary, mother of Jesus, was buried, and there is a basilica away from the main site that is dedicated to her. But it is also home to the famous Temple of Artemis, which is,
I was going to say that,
one of the wonders of the world. So you have to wonder, is there a connection between the Mary story and that of Artemis, the mother goddess of Anatolia?
Right.
So,
was Artemis also Cybele?
Cybele, there are connections between the two. Cybele is specifically an Anatolian goddess, which is probably based on there's also a Mesopotamian variation. Famously,
the title, so very old.
Yeah, she's famously associated with riding a chariot piloted by lions, for example. Right. There are connections, though, with Ephesian Artemis is what they would call her. It's kind of a fusion between the two.
Okay.
You may have seen it. It's the statue that looks like a triangle, and there are what are thought to be either many breasts or many bull testicles, both being symbols of fertility. There are a few famous statues, and that's where Ephesian Artemis comes from.
Mm-hmm.
And this is the perspective of the theater that was built, probably one of the better preserved ones in the list of theaters that I've ever visited. But it is a truly magnificent site and is extremely well preserved in terms of getting around the countryside and scoping out what it was like to be in not a more of a provincial level capital city.
And they probably had something that went over the top.
There was probably awnings at one point, or there was definitely would have been a stage towards the bottom that was elevated, so you wouldn't have seen the road passing by.
Right.
The wooden frames are now long gone, but the acoustics in there are fantastic. If you've ever had the opportunity, sure. they still actually do a really good job.
Yeah, you're down there, you scream up, everybody hears you. You don't even have to scream; it just echoes right on up. It's pretty cool.
I've not had
the other really really interesting thing is the the stoa, the walkway that you see leading. That would have been so, it would have had the columns built, and it would have been so impressive. And there would have been painting color. It would have been colorful or stark white or any amount of assumptions. But it would have been very eye impressive. Like you would have looked at it and gone, "Whoa!"
Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, with a lot of the way the city is, or the layout of the city is, you can get some of the main roads are still, or the main, I guess you call them the causeways, are still intact. Where during the tourist season, it gets pretty packed, so you can get a good idea of what it felt like to be an average day-to-day citizen trying to make your way up and down the city itself. So it is very popular for a reason, and I think it is oftentimes what people will go to go to that region of Turkey for as their main destination.
Here's the next picture.
And this is the image that all Turkish tourist promotions use. Is the Library of Celsus, a Roman aristocrat of the 2nd century AD, I believe. This was his public funding of a magnificent library. Not the same. Apparently, it was not the same level as, say, that in Pergamon or Alexandria. But the fact that we have the front facade as it is, and you can go inside into the interior and kind of get an idea. Along with that, you can see on the right-hand side, it's a little bit hard to tell in this photo, but that's also a monumental gate. And it also gives the inscription of the dedicants of who put it there. It is a beautiful location. Just seeing this also in person, especially as you come from the one side, you enter this long winding road that presents it in the distance and gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And then finally, you're standing right there. And there's actually some interesting details of it. For example, if you look at the steps, I don't have a photo of it, but there are actually a couple of carvings. One of them being these are not done professionally. These are done by people who had too much time on their hands, where they carved games into the I forget the name of the circle game, but it's they have rules on how you can play it. And there's also a menorah actually carved into one of the stones by one of the local resident Jewish population, which I thought was very fascinating, that it survived however many millennia to the present day as kind of an indication that there was a population of Jews in this area. And that's actually something I can bring up later as we get to Sardis. But for now, this is the highlight of the Ephesian trip for a lot of people. Not mine, but it is up there.
I believe this is another picture of
this is the other perspective of the theater, of what you're entering into, and just seeing how massive it really is in the draw distance.
And these are all pieces, some are columns, but some are the lintels. I don't know, the areas that go above the column, because some of these are flat. Maybe they're parts of the road.
Possibly. Yeah. There seems to be a mix, and I think that this is part of the excavation team just being efficient. Like, just put them here right now. We don't have space to stick them anywhere else. But a lot of it is there is parts that are organized where they find similar pieces, but just not enough to reconstruct them. But they might as well leave them out in a organized fashion to allow people to enter into the theater and the larger areas of Ephesus.
You can see a column top here with the
The
with
little
the
carvings and ornate designs on
yeah,
them.
it's pretty, this is my kind of stuff, but it's, right now we don't know what's laid out currently and what was there. So, this whole area, it probably wasn't like this. This is what they've laid out.
Correct.
And then some of these uh, rocks are there as part of the road or part of some kind of construction. Archaeology can get pretty confusing.
Yeah, for those who have not had the chance to visit a lot of these styles of ruins, especially outside, say, Rome included, but if you go more outside of the country in Greece and Turkey, where they're still actively excavating, you find a lot of these. I guess you would call them the equivalent of ancient garbage dumps, where
Mm.
archaeologists are just like, we have no idea what to do with these. Put them in here for now, and then we can keep building the pieces as we go along. Because also the problem is a lot of this stuff was probably recycled by later cultures. She said, ancient temple, we're not going to use it, but we'll use it for building. So
Right.
pieces are missing, probably dragged away, and we're left with a broken puzzle piece, a bunch of puzzle pieces for a puzzle we can't complete just yet.
And sometimes parts of this are pieces of older buildings. So,
Mm-hmm.
you've got a whole bunch of things that are going on. So here, I think this is right. We're in Byzantium at this point.
We're in Istanbul, the heart of it,
Yes.
the famous square, and Istanbul was my first destination before I traveled down the countryside of Turkey. It was also my last because Turkey was Western Turkey was my brief sojourn during the middle of this whole trip. But this was my very first day in Istanbul, first full day to go visit all the three famous religious monuments of the Hagia Sophia. This is where where classical Constantinople or Constantinople of the Byzantine period would have been focused around. And right now, the minarets on the background would not have been there in the time of Justinian, Constantine, or not, well, definitely not Constantine, but Justinian up until the conquest of 1453. Those were added later once it was converted to a mosque.
Mm-hmm.
During the period after the First World War and the collapse of the Ottoman Empire, it was then turned into a public museum. And then, unfortunately, in my opinion, anyways, it was reconverted back into a mosque of the last few years, which is I'm not a particular fan of that choice. I think that it should be remaining a secular spot open to the world. I never felt uncomfortable in there from any of the staff or the visitors who, as a non-Muslim, I never felt pressured to be like that. But I think it's a shame where it feels more of a political move than anything else. And I think that,
Mm.
and that's neither here nor there. But that was one factor I had to consider, since most people before me got to visit it in its traditional secular state.
Right. Now you said this is Hagia Sophia.
Yes, this is the
Okay.
Hagia Sophia, built in the time of Justinian on the orders of his architects. Procopius famously describes the building of it, how it soars to the heavens, and the splendor of it. And it was probably the most, I guess if you want to call it, the most beautiful building in Christendom, probably until the early, mid, I guess, even the late Middle Ages, depending on your point of view. Definitely for Orthodox, this is Orthodox followers. This is the St. Peter's Basilica for them, and
Right.
now it is also an important religious site for Muslims. But it holds up to its reputation despite being 1,500 years old.
Right. So you could sort of see what was, and I'll call them the Romans because I don't know what else to call them.
Mm-hmm.
What was built by the late Romans, but I think you could also see to the left here. This looks medieval.
That was probably more of an Ottoman construction.
Okay.
I'm not terribly familiar with it. I couldn't tell you exactly if it was. I know they were doing a lot of restoration work in Istanbul at the time I was visiting, so a lot of
Right.
this was unfortunately not available to me. You could also see there's a later photo of Hagia Irene, which was kind of the prototype for the Hagia Sophia, where you could see that the Byzantine architecture strictly, and nothing from a later influence like the
Later.
Ottomans or any rebuilding.
You can also see the paint that,
The,
in many cases it's gone, but you could see you could see some of the paint on the building itself. Pretty pretty, again, it would have been pretty impressive. We're going to take a look inside, which is going to blow everybody's mind.
Yes. So the
This is
interior,
just so impressive.
it was a very awe-inspiring moment to be able to finally walk in and see, and to imagine, imagine being someone who doesn't come from buildings that are more than 10 foot, 20 foot tall, or if you're, especially from those envoys who were from, say, Kievan Rus, or of Norway, where you're mostly operating in longhouses. This would have been an amazing sight in its heyday. It still is an amazing sight, but at its height of its splendor, when you actually see the bells and whistles that went into these great imperial services of the Eastern Roman Empire and the Byzantine Emperor. And right now it is now, as it's been converted back into a mosque, they have rolled out the prayer rug. It's a little bit more restricted in how we were able to go about, and as part of the conversion process, we weren't able to get to the higher levels to see the mosaics of Mary and some of the others. I've heard they've opened it up since then, but again, I wish I could have had the chance to see this a few years earlier when it wasn't a situation like this. But it still is. Seeing it as it was actually beautiful, and especially when you gaze up into these ceilings and see the dome of when it was built. And it was a very similar experience comparing it to the Pantheon in Rome and seeing their dome. This was a little bit fancier. You could see like the next progression of design and the philosophy behind it.
Right.
As we can see, this is unfortunately it's hard to capture three-dimensional depth in a photo like this, but seeing the mosaic of the seraphim along with the gilded dome of it all, I would have loved to have seen this as like what a traditional service would have looked like, or an imperial coronation. There are parts of the flooring where you can see where the throne of the emperor was. The decorations all along the columns, the floor, it's stunning. I mostly took the aerial shots at the point, because that's what you see when you're staring up and kind of gazing above and trying to understand what the mindset of was people who were so devoted to this and apparently converted at the very sight of just seeing such a magnificent building.
It's concrete and stone, right?
Concrete and stone. A lot of there's elements of Porphyrian red marble, which is a kind of a darker, almost purplish colored marble that is only excavated from Egypt in a specific quarry. There are a few pieces in Rome that use that marble. But it is gone now. It's been completely used up. And they incorporate other parts of buildings. For example, they took columns from the Temple of Artemis in Ephesus and incorporated it into this building. They also took over, there's actually some other aspects that have been moved by later Ottoman sultans, such as a large marble vase from Pergamon. But it's a blend of the height of late antique construction patterns of the late Roman world, of Christianity at large, and it is truly a sight to behold.
Yeah, just think about the fact that they had obviously no electricity, so we're talking miles and miles of candles, and just either it being very dark at night with candles lit all over the place, and then when that sunrise comes up and it filters through all of these windows, what it would have been like.
And a lot of the paintings I think they are stylistically designed to capture the changing in light, where having been now to many Orthodox monasteries and the tradition of the frescoes, like when I was at Meteora and visiting the monasteries there, when they clearly were only visible by candlelight, how they glow and radiate and capture that light and give almost an ethereal like image of divine status. And I mean, I wish that, and they've currently installed when it is during call to prayer, when they do it 5 times a day, they do have curtains now that cover up the paintings and mosaics of not the seraphim, but that of Mary and Christ as a child. And I don't have that up in this photo, but that was one of the changes they've made in the last few years. But comparing that to the Hagia Sophia, we're looking at an Ottoman creation of the Blue Mosque. and it is in its own right incredibly impressive. And stylistically, it's interesting to compare as one of the most beautiful mosques in the entire world, having not been there myself, but seeing an expression of Ottoman splendor at its height. It is also incredibly imposing, and comparing it from nearby Hagia Sophia, the going from one to another felt similar, but very, very different in its approach.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
As you can see, the extent to which they designed it with geometric patterns, straying away from iconic figurines and more into aniconic designs and patterns, mixture of calligraphy, floral decorations. Every inch was a masterpiece in terms of how it just look. You could see the details, but then when you got closer, it was details in details, and it's hard to really get a sense of how dedicated these master Islamic craftsmen were coming up with art styles that strayed away from the human form, and what they could do with it was absolutely stunning.
Yeah, this is a lot of Arabic writing,
Mm-hmm.
A lot, quite a lot. I don't know what it says, but quite a lot. And there wouldn't be any idols because idols would have been and are taboo.
Mm-hmm.
No idols, no pictures of saints, no pictures of anyone.
And at this point, along with one of the other major sites is, of course, Galata Tower, which I believe was a Venetian creation or Genoese. I'm Italian. I forget my Italians at this point. But it is in the middle of Galata's area. It's a very popular tourist area. It's surrounded by, and from the top of the building, you can actually see the landscape of Istanbul as it crosses from Europe to Asia, the many bridges and all the bits and pieces of the many mosques and churches that dot the landscape. And honestly, among the various cities I've traveled to, I would say in terms of just picturesque landscapes, it's hard to beat Istanbul as number one, just by the sheer scale and the depth of what you can witness. And the buildings themselves are actually beautiful. And I love Roman Athens, but sometimes it's hard to get when you get that view over the Bosphorus and the boats that are passing through the bridge, sailing off.
There you go.
And from here, you can see from Galata Tower, you can see the Imperial District, where you can have the Hagia Sophia, the various many mosques that line that. And that bridge had a lot of fishermen on it, and it really smelled like sardines and bait as I was crossing it, and I got a little bit sick after a while. But it just how large it really was is really captured in this photo. And I actually didn't even know that Istanbul had a population of somewhere along 30 million people, if I understand correctly.
Oh boy,
it was intimidating, to say the least.
Yeah. A lot going on in that town.
Yeah, but of course, you always can find the remnants of the ancient world, and this is part of that vision of Constantine and his successors as the inheritors of the Greek and Roman tradition. This being the famous column of Delphi, the serpent column set up by the dedicants of victors of the Persian War, or at least rather the victors of Plataea, and there used to be 3 snake heads at the top of it. 2 of them are lost. One of them has been recovered and is currently in the Istanbul Archaeological Museum, which can be seen. But this is in nearby what is called the Hippodrome, the ancient racing track of the Romans, or the Byzantine Romans, who loved chariots way more than they did gladiators, and caused a number of riots during the time of Justinian. But this column of Delphi is the original. There is one in Delphi that is a replica standing there because this was transported to Constantinople by Constantine himself way back in the 4th century AD. So it's been here a very long time. And the fact that it does remind you of what Constantine was trying to do and link himself, even though as a capital of a new Christian empire, they still really valued that Greek and classical Greek and Roman tradition, and this is part of their way of claiming centrality as the new center of the world, whereas Delphi was the center of the old Greek world and Rome was the center of the Roman world. Constantinople does a little bit of both, and it's hot. It's always surprising just to get a little bit of taste of classical antiquity when you're going into Istanbul.
Is this bronze?
Yes, it is bronze. What's funny is that we actually have photo minarets from the 15th century that show the traditional bronze snake heads still attached. But then some point between, like, say, 15 something and the present, we lost them. They were taken. And then we found one of them outside, I believe, of Topkapi Palace. The other two were lost. We may never find them again. Probably not. They may have been melted down for all we know, but we managed to recover one of them, so that is at least something, and we have an idea of what they look like.
Pretty cool.
Now, this is what you would call maybe the Little Hagia Sophia. This is adjacent to Topkapi Palace, where the Ottoman sultans used to live. This is this is not as highly or well preserved, but it does capture the original late Roman Byzantine aesthetics a lot more. They didn't dress it up too much or convert it into a mosque like they did the Hagia Sophia. But if you go inside, it's kind of a little rundown. Not many visitors inside, but it still nevertheless has its own beauty into it. And we see what it looks like on the interior of the altar. This, for example.
Yeah, it's pretty. But this is pretty. When you walk into a historic place like this, that has any amount of religion base, you can't say you don't feel it. It's like walking into a Catholic church, whether you're Catholic or not. It has this environment, this pressure, this feeling that, oh, there's something going on here. and I remember when I was in Bethlehem, I just thought to myself, I don't know who's been here, but everyone has been here. Like I can't imagine who has been here other than me, because we're talking about 3,000 years ago. So who was inside this and, prayed, got down on their hands and knees and said a little prayer? We're talking some fairly impressive people.
Well, and you sometimes capture this when you notice the little details when you look down. When you see marble stone steps that have a curve to them because they've been worn away from the thousands and thousands of footprints. When you enter buildings, like the Hagia Sophia has a very prominent step into it where you could see people who have walked on it over time to go into the prayers and whatnot. You could just see the weight of the centuries literally crushing it down. You can see the footprints of those who came before. And when you walk in these ancient buildings, and whether they are say Greco-Roman, pagan, and then converted to Christian, it is easy to insert yourself and kind of get lost in the idea that this was a sacred place.
Mm-hmm.
And even if you are more of a secular person who's not necessarily inclined for spirituality, you still get that. And I think that these things are easily transmittable, and you get an appreciation of like the light coming in, and the architects knew what they were doing when they were designing.
Mm-hmm.
They wanted to give that full effect as possible, because that emphasized their closeness to their gods or God, depending on what you were believing in. And they really knew how to capture that. And unfortunately, the Hagia Irene is not very well preserved outside of this. It's pretty run down, but I still think there is beauty in it, regardless of whatever state it's currently in.
Absolutely. Where is this frieze from?
So this frieze is actually in the Istanbul Archaeological Museum. This was my personal highlight. So this is from what is known as the tomb of Alexander.
Yeah, I was going to say.
It's of Alexander, but the tomb himself did not belong to Alexander.
Mm-hmm. So this would be Alexander, and this is Bucephalus.
That is Bucephalus and Alexander riding into battle. This was actually discovered in Sidon, which is one of the cities of Phoenicia. And this probably depicts either... there's a number of scenes on this enormous sarcophagus it depicts Alexander defeating the Persians, who you could see are cowering. They're wearing more traditionally Eastern garb. You could see the Macedonians and Greeks in their armor fighting out and battling with the Persians. This could be Granicus. This could be Issus. Probably was Granicus or some capacity. But it does also capture other elements, such as, the Greeks triumphing over the barbarians. But then there are other parts of the frieze that show the Greeks and the Persians hunting together, hunting other animals, kind of as a cooperative unit. Maybe it was a way for them to say, this is an ideal of what we would like to happen now. Now that we are, fought each other, we can now progress in some sort of unified empire of a sorts. And the detail in these things are incredible. It is one of my favorite art pieces I've ever seen, or artifacts that are currently available.
There, you can barely see the color now, but there was a lot of color involved, and you could also see the lion head on Alexander's head. So he's wearing, the Heracles kind of thing going on there.
And this was probably done within Alexander's lifetime. So in terms of accuracy towards outfits and costumes, this is about as close as you're going to get outside of going to the tomb of Agios Athanasios in Macedonia, which I did visit a couple of months ago, about a year ago. So, but this was my highlight in the Istanbul Archaeological Museum, which was fantastic. Really recommend it. You have to take time to do that if you have the opportunity to.
Yeah, well, the other things that are interesting is that knowing that the dress, that what Alexander's wearing, the chiton, it's a skirt, for goodness sake. What he's wearing, as compared to trousers and a tunic, was what the Persians are wearing. And you could see the other Macedonian also wearing, the armor, quote unquote, the armor that he's wearing, but it's still a skirt. Mm-hmm. When Alexander took on the Persian dress, that really rankled the Macedonians. The Greeks just could not, go with that. The fact that he took on some Persian clothes, that he mimicked the Persians in some way. I mean, the fact that he wore a pair of pants, it bothered the Greeks to no end.
I mean, as someone who likes, if I could live in an era where I could walk around, or in the weather where I could walk around in shorts or some sort of tunic, I would agree with that wholeheartedly. I'm not a big fan of pants personally, but
I know, right?
It's definitely it's interesting the way, and this is actually an interesting interpretation, because this was done by a person who was not of Persian or Greek ancestry, but of a Phoenician ancestry. So, and they still capture this sort of art style, and I guess this visual language is incredibly interesting. I wish we knew more about the occupant who did it, but unfortunately we just don't. We know the name. I don't have it on me at the moment, but this was one of many of these sarcophagi that were prominent in Sidon. They're beautifully detailed like this.
Amazing. Very cool.
So this is from a small village outside of I think the village is Mutveli. If I butchered that, sorry for the villagers who I met there. This is what they would call this is what is believed to be the battlefield of Magnesia. In 190 or early 189 BC, the armies of the Roman Republic and the Kingdom of Pergamon fought against Antiochus III of the Seleucid Empire, probably the most warlike of the Seleucid rulers, who campaigned from basically the borders of Thrace and Europe to all the way to Afghanistan. He had restored the fortunes of the Seleucid Empire and tried conquering Greece on the initiative of some trustworthy people. He had very poor success against the Romans in places like Thermopylae, the same Thermopylae. And on the way back, he decided to fortify himself here in Magnesia, which is this is actually an area that's outside the village, on the base of Mount Manisa, which was Mount Cyplus in Antiquity, where you get the name Magnesia ad Cyplus, or Magnesia near Mount Cyplus. And this is the battlefield itself was the sides were enormous. The Romans and Pergamines had maybe about 50,000, and the army of Antiochus was about 60 to 70. So it was a substantial conflict that ultimately the Romans won, thanks to the Pergamenes, and Antiochus and the Seleucids were driven way back into Syria and not allowed to campaign in this region of the world anymore. This was
it was beginning to like the beginning of the Roman Empire. I mean, it was still the Republic, but what was the Roman? Do you know what the Roman's name was? I wonder if I have that.
It was actually the commanding consul was Lucius Scipio, the brother of Scipio Africanus, who was the conqueror of Carthage. Scipio was allegedly at this battle, but he was sick, and his brother took command, probably to get the glory of defeating the Seleucid king. And as was King Eumenes II of Pergamon, probably the most prolific of the Pergamene Attalid rulers. It was mostly his victory above all else. He delivered the killing blow that collapsed the Seleucid army after they tried sending out scythe chariots and cataphracts and war elephants. And their battle line extended for well over a mile. We would be on the Roman side right now. Opposite of the road would have been the Seleucid army, with the phalanx bristling, some 16 to 20,000 pikemen with their spears out, marching in formation, which is a terrifying prospect.
Yeah, think about, you think that this whole area is flat. You take down the electric poles, and you see the perfect place to wage a battle. It's a big flat place.
And the fact that it would have been, when you walk, the area around it is quite hilly, but this is like the only flat plain you could get, as you mentioned, for Antiochus to deploy his phalanx on a ground that was suitable to them. And it still went the other end for him, unfortunately. But nevertheless, this was actually I wouldn't say go out of your way to do this, because it was a very extensive process, and I probably wouldn't have done it had I known. But nevertheless, it's interesting to be on what is probably the ancient battlefield of such a significant world event.
It's this. I'm not sure if I'm getting my stories right. Is this where the Roman, where they said, they sort of shook hands and said, so this is how it's going to play out, and the Hellenistic king said, "Let me go back and talk to my friends," and the Roman took an instrument, his scepter or whatever, and he made a circle, and he goes, "Think about it before you step out. We're gonna figure it out right here. Your friends are inside this circle." Is that the same? Am I thinking of something else?
It is an Antiochus, but not the Antiochus. Antiochus IV, that was actually Antiochus and Pork Epiphanes, the Antiochus of the Book of Maccabees, the abomination of desolation. That was outside of the gates of Alexandria when he was about to conquer it. And the Roman ambassador Gaius Popilius Linus, as you mentioned, drew the circle and told him to think about it with an answer when you step out of it.
Yes.
But this was the beginning of the Romans interfering with the Seleucids as the masters of the Eastern Mediterranean. And from this point onwards, the Romans were kind of the de facto lead party in a lot of arbitrations. And this would eventually lead into conflict, as we would with the Macedonian kings. And then the rest of the Hellenistic world would follow slowly but surely afterwards.
The old Pyrrhic victory.
And unfortunately, they weren't too happy, because this cost Antiochus quite a lot in terms of money and manpower, and canceled a lot of his plans.
I mean, it when the Romans came and Romanized, Hellenism didn't end. I mean, the Romans adapted it, so they bent it, and they became Hellenized in the process. But the true Hellenism, at some point in the time, the line was drawn in the sand.
Well, definitely for the political order, at least. Culturally speaking, the Greek world marched along onwards, especially as it captured the hearts and minds of many Romans who found themselves as Philhellenes and admirers of Greek culture. Exactly. And that was probably that outlasted them substantially longer than any of the kingdoms of the Greek East would. But yes, and the I believe it was Horace put it, the conquered, the vanquished something along the lines of the vanquished or the captives ended up capturing the captor. While the Greeks had lost their political freedom, they had won their cult. They had beaten the Romans in the cultural long game.
Right. Exactly.
But yes.
Exactly.
And this is a little bit to the north. And actually, speaking of Eumenides of Pergamon, I'm taking this photo from Pergamon itself. So near the city of Bergama, very convenient, is the Acropolis of Pergamon, which is situated on a hill. So from there, you can see the the landscape of the modern town. You have to either drive up yourself, or I preferred to take the elevator cable cars up to the Acropolis, which was a much more interesting experience. And you will sure go up. And another photo of mine will show you just how high you are. And it's little wonder that Pergamon was so prominent of a city in this region, and it served as a major city for multiple empires, being from the Persian period to the Alexandrian, Seleucid, and then the Attalids, and then finally the Romans, where it remained in their hands for many, many centuries.
And Pergamon had such wealth and became the benefactors for many, many of the Hellenistic cities. Even Athens. I mean, It became quite a center of wealth. Just pretty crazy.
Now, this is the sort of the highest peaks of Pergamon itself. This was a temple of the Trajanum, which is a temple dedicated to Trajan. This was built way later in the Roman period, but it does show you first off the scale of how high we are compared to the modern cityscape, where a lot of the activity was in the Acropolis, where the Attalid kings first resided. It was they who were so successful at carving out their own kingdom. Originally, they were a Seleucid client of sorts, official that was given a degree of power. They managed to take independence and then establish themselves as a major player. And after the Battle of Magnesia, they were the most powerful kingdom in Asia Minor for many decades. And the Attalid kings, as you mentioned, were very, very conscious about being benefactors, both to their own city and to the cities of the wider Mediterranean. So we find many dedications in Athens, for example. Near the Agora, you can find the Stoa of Attalus, which is a modern recreation of an ancient building, but the Attalids had promoted various other facilities across the empire, across the Hellenistic world and the Eastern Mediterranean. But the city itself really does capture the beauty of it, because when you're going up, when we went up, we went early in the morning. The sun was just rising. As you're ascending up the hill, you could see the remains of the temples. It would have been magnificent at its height. And the fact that you're so high up, and you can tell this was an imperial capital of sorts, gives us a very similar vibe as to how well stocked Rome is. Pergamon was very much like this. And it really is it was probably my favorite part of the whole trip, hands down, in terms of the experience of it, the aesthetic, the visuals, and also what it means to me in terms of my period. And being one of these examples is the famous theater, which is the steepest in the ancient world. When I mean by steep, it is steep. You walk up those steps in the middle of that, and you feel like you're going to tumble over and fall to your doom. It is absolutely incredible, and you could see it as you're driving up along the city. You could see this kind of glistening in the stone. Definitely an intimidating climb, especially with a weighted backpack on and trying to navigate that. Probably the most impressive theater I've ever seen in my times and across the various ancient sites I've been able to visit. But well worth it.
The portion of this must have been very small.
It was, but it was all elevated, and it was able to be broadcast echoed. But this was also a more of a whether it was more intended for the nobility is a possibility. I don't know how many people of a certain age could climb this, and once they get up in their 50s and 60s, this is pretty intensive to go see the local play of Aeschylus or Euripides, but it clearly was intended to be a spectacle.
Yeah, it's pretty much.
And here's another perspective of how steep those steps are when you're looking down. Try not to walk too fast down the steps. Otherwise, you'll end up faster than you want to be.
Yeah, really. This would, this reminds me of the Mayan temples, and also some of the Mesopotamian ziggurats, which are so steep.
And then I'm not sure for them if it was a deliberate aesthetic choice or just the limitations of the landscape, because the Acropolis of Pergamon is extremely high up, which is great for fortifications and defending against attackers, but not so great when you're trying to be a little bit more of a cultured environment where you're trying to make it to build these theaters into the landscape, which is often how it was done across the Greek and Roman world. Here's another part of the Acropolis just adjacent to the theater. The boards are more modern, but they have remnants of the stone towers and the remains of the temples and market. To the left, near that tree, would have been, I believe, the remains of the Agora, where businesses were conducted. So the marketplace, public activities, and the whole area feels very much like a fortress city with all the amenities. A lot of the parts. One thing you will notice is that if you do travel in this area, you'll probably encounter many German tourists. That's because the best and greatest of all of these stuff from Pergamon has been taken to Berlin. And the famous altar, allegedly it was done with an agreement with the local governor of this region, but who knows? And you'll find the famous, the temple to Athena inside of the Pergamon, the Berlin Museum of Pergamon, and the level of artistry in the design is actually incredible. And I wish we could have seen this as it was in the area, but that's the nature of late 19th century or late 20th, late 19th, early 20th century archaeology was take the best stuff and bring it back to the museums. So
exactly, yeah, that's unfortunately true. And I mean, it was France. It was Arthur Evans. It was Hermann Hesse. I'm sorry, not Hermann Hesse. That was an author. Schliemann. Thank you. I don't know why I said Hermann Hesse. Schliemann, and he had his the fellow who took the German who took care of his work afterwards, who was more of an archaeologist than he was. I don't remember his name, but he was also German. I mean, archaeology in those days, it was the French, it was the Germans, it was, and it was all taken back. I mean, the Rosetta Stone was found by Napoleon. And it ended up going, to England?
It was taken as war trophy by England from the French, and now there's a big debate of whether it is France that deserves it or Egypt deserves it, and unfortunately that's a big can of worms that I'm fearing I think that the British Museum does not want to deal with. Once they repatriate one, I'm sure all the other museums are quaking in their boots wondering when are our people calling us as well.
Yeah, it's these things are unfortunate. I mean, very unfortunate.
And now turning away, this is more of a quiet, serene little visit. This is what we know as Priene. These columns are the remains of a temple of Athena that was rebuilt using the funds from Alexander the Great, who had visited this area. He had paid for the restoration of its temple, and it is probably the most prominent, remaining part of the city that is still standing to some extent or another. Very much centralized. It's kind of deep inside. We did this as a side visit, as it kind of just popped up for us. But it was a pretty interesting site, all things considered. You had a temple to the Egyptian gods Serapis and Isis, which probably dated to the Ptolemaic period when they were the Ptolemies had done a lot of patronage along Asia Minor because there were so many Greek cities there that even though they were in Egypt, they wanted to make sure to pay homage or pay goodwill and benefaction towards these areas as well. But I just really thought this was a cute little spot and off the beaten path a bit, but it does capture a lot of you could see the remains of the stone buildings absolutely everywhere. It felt very much like a very condensed little sanctuary. Now, returning a little bit more to a more famous city is Sardis. Sardis being one of the most important cities of the Persian period, but also of the Seleucid period, and also later on in the Roman period, this was of some prominence, especially when it relates to Christian history, but also in Jewish history too. So for this remains of the basilica. This was rebuilt by Turkish archaeologists, I believe. They had restored what had been a prominent building in the later Roman period. Whether that's 2nd or 3rd century, I do not remember. But it is probably the most characteristic feature of Sardis as a whole. But there are many different buildings in there that kind of capture the different eras of the time. So this is more of its Christian phase or later Roman phase above all else, and is the most well-preserved of those phases. But there are others, as I'm sure we'll get to in a moment. So, Sardis is one of the most famous, one of the great churches of Asia in the Christian tradition, it was actually a very prominent site for Jews. And during the reign of Antiochus III, who we had mentioned as part of Magnesia, in the earlier part of his reign, he had to recapture Sardis after it was taken by a usurper, and it devastated the population. So, as part of this, he resettled it with colonists from Judea, and this established one of the earliest Jewish populations outside of the Jewish homelands, and they therefore have a longstanding tradition of Jewish worship here. This is the remains of the synagogue, and you can see how far it stretched back, and there are mosaic floors everywhere. This building was way bigger than I anticipated, and it's remarkably well preserved. They have a carpet specifically so you try not to tread all over the stuff. Of course, people do because they don't follow the rules. And this is one of the other sites indicating it's the interesting fact that is probably, I think it's the earliest Jewish synagogue outside of the Near East. It's definitely the earliest in Asia Minor and near Europe. So it does have a remarkable prominence in the history of Judaism at large.
That's pretty, looks to me like at the very, very way back, that's the altar where they would have sacrifice.
Mm-hmm. And they have they have parts where they have for the mounts and whatnot. I'm not terribly familiar with Jewish archaeology, and I can't attest to its biblical history either, but there is a clear intention of you're dedicating your attention towards the altar back there. Right. And everything's a long entrance, and I'm sure it would have been a magnificent services had they run it. But I can't speak too much, unfortunately, in the state it's in. Mm-hmm. Now, this is also another feature of Sardis, which I think is interesting. Now, this looks like just a typical archaeologist layering. You could see just the levels of history kind of stacking on top of each other. But this part here, the very bottom of this platform or block, is actually the remains of what is known as the royal roads. So if you read your Herodotus, the Herodotus speaks of a road system that connected Sardis to the rest of Asia and the Persian Empire. It was a mixture of an actual road, but also just a series of waypoints. But this was the beginning of this is one of the points of beginning where the road systems that connected much of the Persian Empire, basically running from Asia Minor until India and more Iran in this case, that the postmen and the correspondents all used to travel along to get messages to and back, where your armies traveled through, and actually that's where the United States Postal Service gets its famous slogan: "Neither rain nor sleet nor shine." Comes directly from Herodotus' recounting of these personnel that ran along the royal roads. So it's nice to see this really kind of this I guess you would call it inconspicuous little piece of of uncovered roads really hides a really magnificent history and more details that meets the eye.
Yeah, the Persian Empire was quite sophisticated.
There's a reason why there was a lot of inspiration from Alexander that he wanted to emulate the Persians and even Herodotus and the like, who may not necessarily like the Persians, nevertheless respected their culture and their achievements as how powerful they were and how much they had done.
I mean, if you think that, if you realize that we're going way back to the Mesopotamian, the Fertile Crescent, that's how far back we go, and 6,000, 5,000, BC. So there's a lot of history there. There's a lot, there's a lot going on in that area.
Now this is turning to my kind of a main city. This is the Agora of Izmir, the modern name for Smyrna, another ancient city that actually was a direct competitor to Ephesus. Both cities tried competing for the title of greatest city in Asia, or Roman Asia anyways. And this is some of the remains of the columns that are outstanding. I believe this part was constructed on the request of Hadrian. Reason being is that at a certain extending further down, there's a gate dedicated to Hadrian's wife, Faustina, if I remember her name correctly. But this was a smaller area. This is more of most of the ancient site is actually buried underground, which is actually I have another photo of, which kind of give you a perspective, because you're walking underneath the remains more of the modern city that's built on top of it. But it is connected to the coastline, and where I based my headquarters when I was traveling up and down the coastline of this region. Mm. And here are some of the underground parts where the marketplace or the shopkeepers were, where businesses were conducted. They had these vaulted arches and these running bodies of waters, presumably for the springs, and that's where you can kind of walk through and see some of the remains of the underground buildings, which was a bit unique. I've never been able to see underground like this before. It does give you a bit more of the antiquity feel than anything else.
Mm. Got one little picture left.
So circling back to Ephesus, only a few hundred kilometers, or not few hundred kilometers, few hundred meters away from the entrance of the main city, you can go to what is known as the Artemision. That is the great temple of Artemis, famously one of the great ancient wonders, the 7 wonders of the ancient world.
This is all that's left.
That's all that's left. This was the same temple that was burned by Herostratus, who burned it allegedly to get famous. And despite the best intentions of the Ephesians, he still got his wish, and his name was remembered forever. It was rebuilt, and you could kind of get a sense of scale of how monumental this building was by the size of the column. You can see the gentleman over there is probably a good 5'10", 5'11". You could probably stack about at least 7 or 8 of them on top of each other, and you wouldn't breach the top. So definitely, it's an interesting little side section that you get these remains of the Belevi Mausoleum and the Temple of Artemis, and you really do understand that it's not just like people focus mainly on Rome and Greece, Athens or Italy as like the center of culture, but Asia Minor as well was still one of the most wealthy parts of the Roman Empire and the Mediterranean world for centuries and centuries. And you could clearly see this in how much they devoted to these architectural wonders. And this is where I wish I didn't have only 3 days in this region. I would have happily spent an entire few weeks here traveling all around. And it was definitely a highlight of my trip overall. And I wish I could go back in a heartbeat, but
there's so much to see. There really is so much to see.
Not enough time, unfortunately, or money or vacation.
I mean, it's pretty, it's pretty crazy. There's so much to see. So much to see. And so much to learn. And it's sometimes when you think about what's going on in the Near East, you think you better hurry up before it's all gone.
That is an unfortunate fact. And I mean, with things have been going on with Syria for the last several decades, if you look at Google Earth, and it's actually unfortunate where The wonders that are of these landscapes, Palmyra, Apamea, has been completely obliterated by both a mixture of radical Islamic terrorists looking to desecrate and pillage for their own funding of their actions, but also people desperate for money in a war-torn world. Is it easier to, I mean, how much is historical significance worth when you need to feed your family bread?
Right.
It's a tragic situation. And if you look at the Google Earth images of Apamea today versus 5-10 years ago, it looks like the crater of the moon. There are holes everywhere from shovels and dynamite that people have blown up. And archaeologists are really struggling to search antiquities markets online, be it through social media or through traditional, like your Sotheby's or anything like that, to see what has been taken, because there are some
It'll
impressive
turn up
finds in this
eventually.
part of the world that we have lost and we will
Mhm.
never know until we actually recover them. And then that lies the biggest part.
Yeah. It's it allows you to dig into prehistory, but doesn't allow you to appreciate perhaps some of the more current, and more current might be the Hellenistic era as opposed to the Bronze Age, or prior to that. And in many cases, these cities are old.
Mm.
So there's still a lot of history, but you're losing. When I say current, you're losing, some of the current beauty of areas. So you're losing history. It's and the other very, very odd thing about history, um, perhaps we could argue about science, is that we think we know what we know until we know something else, and it's just like, oh, that wasn't the way it was. We thought it was, but it wasn't. And here's the proof. So history is pretty fluid. And even when we know what we know, there's three sides at least to that story.
The question is, we have to find it first. Otherwise, we have to like the drunk man searching for his keys in the night under a lamplight, because that's the only place that's popping up evidence in the area we most likely find something.
Right. Yeah. So you said you're going to Jordan next. So I think I'll invite you back at the end of the year after you've come back, and we can go take a look at Jordan. We can take another journey into the past.
Absolutely, I will. I will be, if you want to see my progress, and I'll be incorporating a lot of this. A lot of this is research for me, so I'll be including as many images as I can in the show, transcripts, and that can all be found on my website. And I try to make these as public through my social media as possible. And my goal is to take a lot of these and translate them onto Wikimedia Commons, just to let people have them for their own research, because it's just nice to have that easy access nowadays without copyright issues. But that's a work in progress, and you'll have to hold me accountable for that by end of the year. How about that?
It's you're doing something for posterity, because the podcast is the new history. It's way people can ingest lots of different things quickly, visually. So for those of us, I love to read, but I also love to see how different authors take that content and deliver it, because you, as I said, you get the history sliced 5 different ways, and that's good. There is no, this is the way. There is none of that.
Mm-hmm.
We'd like to think that. I mean, there is some meaning in things, but there's nuance, and I love nuance, and I appreciate that. There's a lot of work providing that nuance.
My budgeting on my book has grown. Books purchasing has grown every year, steadily, and I don't think it's stopping anytime soon. But yeah, I mean, it really. My goal is to try to digest the complex research out there that's done by people before me and who are a little bit smarter than me, and maybe give people a starting point to see what interests them or find things they wouldn't consider otherwise. And part of this travel experience has been able to see this in person and experience this and try to transmit that sense of lived in space or experience to my listeners. and hopefully they get some value out of it. I certainly just
Yeah.
enjoy it for the sake of my own
Right.
love for the history. And I appreciate you having me back on, and I'm looking forward to sharing my travels with you after I'm back from Jordan.
Great. So everybody can find Derek on the Hellenistic Age. It's it's clearly on YouTube. Looking it up. There's also a website, and I'll put all the information down below so that people can find it. Do you ever think that you're going to go outside Hellenism, or is that your love and you're staying there?
Well, the Hellenistic world is
there's a lot there, so
there is a lot there, unfortunately, and I'm over halfway done with the period, which is relieving but also terrifying. Whether I would delve outside of it, I think there's a lot of stories to tell in the Hellenistic world when it comes to books or cultures I don't really focus on too much that I would like to explore. But I think there's potential. I mean, I consider the Hellenistic world from Britain to India. So if I run out of things to talk about, that'll be a dark day. But I think that's far in the distance, and I'd like to start once I finish the podcast or get close to it. I can start delving into more writing books and focusing more on individual subjects and take all what I've learned and translate that to a literary medium.
There's there's so many people, places, and things within the Hellenistic Empire that I can't imagine you exhausting them. I really can't. I mean,
not
you
anytime
could spend
soon, anyways.
Bactria alone.
Yeah, Bactria in India is worth years worth of study.
Exactly. So happy trails. I really.
Thank you so much. It'll be a long way before I get there.
I appreciate you coming back, and we'll revisit for sure.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
You bet. Take care, everyone.